Very soon I'm being chairman of the review there, and so we're glad to have you all here. So the issue that we want that part of our town to remain looking like part of our town. Who is responsible with the architect or the engineer? Sorry, I was going to get somebody who would introduce me to everybody that we don't know.
Oh, sure. I'm happy to introduce our team. I'm Robert Poppleton with the Firm Company. I'm here tonight with Blake Navarro on our team. We have 3 architects from Boudreaux with us tonight. Heather, if you want to begin and get things down the line.
Good to be with you again. Heather Mitchell, joined by my colleague working on the project in George Schaefer, who is part of the team for the very master planning phase, and Kara Gertie. Mr. Wood.
Sure. Jason Wood, Dorchester County Administrator.
Anybody else? At this point, I'm just going to turn it over to you. I think I did want to read one thing to you because this is kind of what put things in when we had our meeting with the regular BAR. And this is, I say this to every one of our BAR meetings. For those of you who may be new to our meeting, our charge is to look at each project purely on aesthetics, design, architecture, height, mass, and scale, and in harmony with the historic district in the town of Somerville. We look at the overall street scene. Now that's our charge from the town as to how we proceed with any and every project, not yours. We do feel that North Main is a very important part of our town because it's old. It's almost the entry to the town there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to y'all because y'all want to come convince us that what you want to do is in line with that what I just read.
Well, thank you. I do want to just first extend thanks to all of you here tonight. It's a busy season right now, and I know this is an evening slot, and I'm sure you have other things that you may be wishing to do in December, but really appreciate you carving out some time for this conversation. I feel that we started in October. It's important for us to continue and are grateful for the possibility of this format. I think that any great project really takes the spirit of collaboration, especially in a community with sensitive assets like the historic district. We want to get it right. We want to roll up our sleeves and work towards something together. I want to pass the mic, so to speak, to Mr. Ward with the county to start some remarks. I have very brief remarks on top of what I've just said, and then we'll quickly pass it along to the architects to give us some structure for conversation tonight in reviewing our project. But just want to start with that. Thank you.
Again, I'm Jason Ward. I'm the Dorchester County Administrator. I've had the pleasure to serve here in Dorchester County and started out in Somerville on September 16th of 2002 as the Deputy Administrator, and have had the pleasure to serve as County Administrator for the last 20 years. With respect to the county, I wanted to provide maybe some context. I think that often that context is missing in our conversation. Going back to 2019, the county embarked on looking at some 23 buildings across the whole county. Everything from our historic courthouse in St. George to 500 North Main Street. And those being some of our oldest assets in terms of building assets. Our purpose in doing that is really trying to evaluate what is the best way for us to go about making sure that we can serve all of our citizens, not just now, but into the future. So in embarking on that, we looked at several different things. We looked at projects that might cause us to acquire additional property And to relocate services, we looked at projects where we could renovate existing facilities, which we have a history of doing. I'll give you an example. We were able to do an adaptive reuse in St. George, which is our Kenneth F. Wagner Services Center. It's very similar to 500 North Main Street. It's a little bit older than that, but it contains many of our county services that are duplicated here in Somerville. It contains our county council chambers. It contains an administrator's office, ROD office, auditor, treasurer, human resources, all those functions that you would typically associate with the government. As we started to look at 500 North Main Street, what differed about that particular property was the fact that we had the presence of the health department on that location. We had the presence of the Alcohol and Drug Commission at that location. I mentioned the Alcohol and Drug Commission because any of you who have gone in there to pay your taxes may recall prior to us relocating them to 320 Midland Parkway in the medical district, you go in the front door and to the right, you'd have the auditor's office and the treasurer's office, but immediately to the left, you've had the Alcohol and Drug Commission. So people were there receiving ADSAP services with not the most privacy at that particular location. So as we embarked upon this particular study, one of the things we identified is that even though they've been there for almost 40 years, maybe this was an opportunity for us to relocate them to a more appropriate location, ultimately in the medical district at 320 Midland Parkway. A little bit the health department. The time that that building really was placed in service in the 90s, because I think a lot of us are aware of this, but I'll say it aloud. The original structure that many of us appreciate from Main Street was constructed in 1937, but a significant addition was done in 1994. And so when you come off of Cedar and you look at the county council chambers, they did a good job of making it blend and looked like it had been there for a long time. It was constructed in 94, but the health department really was not sufficient and large enough to serve the needs of the county in excess of 170,000 people. When I came here, Dorchester County had about 96,000 people. And so when you think about that significant growth, as we projected our growth for the future, we identified the need to relocate. So in November, we were able to do that, not only for the health department, but we were able to do that also for DSS, Health and Human Services, the First Circuit Solicitor, all in a adaptive reuse in a bylaw off of Broomfield Road near Orangeburg Road. So I mention these things because when we look at 500 North Main, we understand the importance of it being a county center of government, and we want to preserve that presence. We think we have an opportunity to do some improvements. I don't want to offend anybody's sensibilities when I talk about Bradford Parish, but we're not looking to preserve Bradford Parish. We're looking to preserve those very major and grand live oak trees and all of the healthy pine trees along the corner because the pine is sacred. So I give that context to say that a number of things have been said, but I think the county, whether it's the veterans facility that we have commissioned at Davis Bailey Park, that we want to replicate in many ways at 500 North Main Street, relocating the monument so that it'll be a place that people can contemplate and appreciate the veterans that have served Dorchester County, preserving bricks that we can incorporate into that particular monument, as well as the patio. And then most of all, what I think most people come to understand and appreciate is the columns and the portico. That's not something we want to demolish. We heard that very clearly. That was something that shouldn't go away. And without saying a whole lot, we appreciate the historic significance of that block. We plan to preserve that history in many ways with Missouri Square, which recognizes Dr. Missouri, and all the way through to sometimes the Reverend J.J. Missouri. I think that would be fair, and I would say if he were here. So we want to work with the bar. We collaborated with town council, town staff, to have this property removed from the TIF. It was never included in the calculations of the revenues for the Midtown TIF. And with cooperation from town council, the school board and county council, we've been able to include it in a fee in lieu of tax district, which may not mean a lot, except for if we are able to accomplish a full redevelopment, including the presence of the county on that property. We believe at some point it will produce about $1 million a year, which will allow many things to be financed, including a parks and recreation center, monies for schools, affordable housing within what's contemplated as housing there that would give us an opportunity to allow teachers, firefighters, emergency, medical personnel, et cetera, public safety, both police and the sheriff's office, to have a presence to really activate that site. I appreciate your patience. I apologize if I've spoken too long, but I wanted to give that context. This was something that we've been working on for a number of years to activate an opportunity to redevelop that site.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Before I make any comments, any questions, I really want this workshop to be as productive as possible. So if you have questions, feel free to jump in on any of those remarks. No, I'll continue.
I think from our perspective, I'm David Price, Vice Chair of the BZA. I think from our perspective, we're much more interested in how that corner looks and how much money it can turn out for the county and for the town.
Understood. I understand your charge.
So, just a very quick recap on how Furman came to the table, building on some of what Jason has just mentioned. When we started participating in this process, it was midstream. You had already begun a listening exercise with the community and crafting a vision, right? So as developers, and I'll talk about our firm briefly, but as developers, oftentimes we go into a blank slate and we have to create something from nothing. We happen to really, as a company, really appreciate historic preservation, adaptive use projects. So oftentimes we're working from great bones. But here we had the benefit of picking up where Jason's team and the community have left off for building on a couple of years' effort. So we take that very seriously. Our mission is we do great projects with great clients in places that we love. And for us, we have all of those ingredients here. We think Somerville, when we first came to this opportunity, very special place. It's obvious. It's been loved for many years. You can't create that without that type of history and legacy. So we wanted to be part of something like that. It's the types of projects we've done, as I mentioned, community impact projects throughout South Carolina. Some of those that are historic, we've worked, just to name a few, we've done 4 in the last 10 years, and we're on our 5th now. We've done Clausen Bakery building, Poe Hardware and Supply, Keys Printing, and most recently Borden Ice Cream Factory. And all of those, we worked closely with historic preservationists, with the State Historic Preservation Office, National Park Service, many of which were 100% renovation projects, some of which were renovation plus thoughtful construction. So learning about history on the site was also attractive to us. We want to get it right in anything that we're doing. And we believed, based on what we knew, based on the goals expressed by the county, both financial and community-oriented goals, that there was potential to be part of something significant here, both in preserving and retelling story as we presented in wanting to preserve the portico and introduce enhancements to celebrate the portico with new view corridors, et cetera, as well as mixed use to activate and really to take advantage of what I believe the town and the county both want in extending the historic downtown experience from Hutchinson Square or it's 5th Street. So as we enter into a conversation tonight, I do want to just share that with you, that we believe that this is a catalyst for not just the town and future investment, not just on the site, but that will come from this investment, but it's also about facilitating significant community-oriented development, significant community investment directly through the proceeds that will be generated from this project. It's historic. Also, we're gonna have we already know we have disagreements on how we're approaching this site. But we want to work, we want to struggle to the best outcome together. So again, thank you for this opportunity. Take any questions you have, otherwise I'll pass it on to Heather and team.
And to back up just a minute here, we thought about goals for today in terms of working and collaborating with you, that we would develop a shared understanding of the project history, which is a little bit of what Mr. Ward and Robert have been doing here. And we would like to focus Mr. Dixon, if it's okay, on the master plan strategy for the historic hospital in lieu of what the new building looks like. We know that's an issue. We feel like that's probably the easier piece, is to rework the design character of the proposed building and bring that to you at a later date. But the crux is how we master plan the site and what the guidelines are and how we can build consensus around the treatment and what pieces of the hospital are preserved. So we thought that it would be most productive to focus on that conversation tonight and have an interactive discussion. We've got and certainly develop a shared approach for next steps in terms of how we come back before you, what other community engagement you might advise that we do, other work sessions that we perhaps set up, et cetera. So that was where we thought we'd spend our time. Does that seem reasonable, Mr. Dixon? Great. So we do have a lot of background information just to kind of develop that shared history. So we'll go through a little bit of this pretty quickly. And if this is not value or you feel like you know and understand this, or if it's relevant, please feel free to interrupt me and we can kind of move on through this. But as Robert alluded to, back in 2020, before they were even involved, the county commissioned a master plan for the site. And we were honored to be a part of that team. So it's been a privilege for us to kind of continue on and now do the actual design. As part of that master plan input, there was community input, stakeholder input that guided the conceptual master plan. And then that based on that conceptual master plan, which we did share at that joint meeting of the BAR and the planning commission, which we referenced and talked about before, there was a selection for developer, which was a competitive process through which Furman was selected. And then there was an extended period of time in developing the terms of that negotiation between the county and the developer. And during that period of time, there was also community input and feedback that based on that the county asked Furman to restructure some of the master planning and the components on the site. And so there's been some improvements there in terms of what pieces of the project are preserved. And then that leads us to where we are now, that we're moving into the actual schematic design and coming before you for the actual approvals for the project. So kind of a quick overview. Those master plan goals were comprehensive, and these are some of the things I think we've got consensus around in terms of what is important and how we preserve the character of Somerville. Certainly this site and how it's currently zoned, and I know that the town staff is prepared to help support tonight to educate, make sure everybody understands what the goal is for the density on the site and on the development of the site. But certainly maximizing the tax base by increasing the development and higher and better use for the site than how the county uses it today, and create the vibrancy and mixed use of downtown. And certainly in any development, they're trying to create a project that's also financially feasible. So this is again just a reminder of that process through the master planning and the number of focus group sessions we had in 2021 and kinds of questions we asked of the community at that point. And there was a lot of conversation around the preservation of the hospital. We heard a lot of back and forth, people who believed it was kind of a sacred piece of the site, and also people thought that it was ready for the site to be redeveloped. So we did hear a lot of very importance in the community to that piece. There was market studies done in terms of what was viable on the site, what the needs were in terms of different components of the mixed use, retail, residential, parking, certainly hotel has been considered for the site over time as well. And then this was the ultimate program or pieces and components on the site that was envisioned at that point in time, which has evolved since then. The hotel is a future option on the site, and both multifamily and retail are certainly the focus at this point in time. The master plan process has been very iterative and many options and different components have been studied. And so we've got some of those here tonight that we can look at. I guess. So then as we looked at the character and again, the defining guiding principles for the master plan, again, many of these are holding true and still guiding the design of the project. George, do you want to kind of walk through some of these?
Sure, so it was some of the feedback and the work sessions and with the steering committee, these were some of the main priorities that we still hold dear to our hearts as we think about designing the site. One of the most important was to maintain the landscape corner on 78 and Main Street. We had tested options where the gateway expression of the site was actually a corner building. And the consensus of the group was that the existing pine trees were of the most sacred elements that are on the site that needed to be preserved. And the existing veil, as you look through those into the site, is something that we wanted to preserve as well. You can see the tree canopy elements were definitely a priority for the design team at the time. Based on the feedback, we wanted some expression that was honoring the existing hospital building, whether that was replica of a portico, the portico that exists, or the reuse of bricks and plaza or architectural site elements. And also just the idea that this would want to be a lively exterior space and incorporate public art. Some of the others, so the hotel was identified as best located on the corner of 4th Street and Main Street for the original master plan. And I think you remember that the original master plan had a 5-story parking deck, and the idea was that that did not have an elevation expression to the edge of the site, so that it was wrapped by housing components. Pedestrian safety and connectivity was always top of mind. We were thinking about the ways that the sort of like the greenway expression on Cedar Street was connected to what we were designing on that edge of the site, and also in the way that pedestrian improvements are happening on Main Street that would connect Hutchinson Square to what we think is the bookend of this historic district. And then also just thinking about obviously the architectural character that we would want to make sure that this feels of this place and it's recognizable to everybody that knows what Somerville feels like in your most important historic spaces.
Jordan, Heather, while that's
Yeah.
cycling, do you want to stand over here?
Sure.
Or and sit? I'll move around.
Yeah. Fun.
So this is just a reminder of the plan that was the consensus master plan that came out of the master plan study. This was the plan that we presented at the joint session that you saw in 2021. And so just to remind everybody, so the idea was that there was a preservation of a natural space that was the threshold to the historic downtown. The hotel component with some activated restaurant and retail was the other anchor on the south side of Main Street. The parking deck was pushed as far to Cedar Street as possible, but then was wrapped by a 5-story residential component that had an amenity space that was envisioned would be the scale and the replica of the existing hospital portico. And the 4-story office building that was facing what we thought and still interpret as the busiest vehicular edge of the site along Highway 78. So in all of these, the design strategies that I think were really things that we were really thinking about was how to preserve sort of that really strong axial expression that currently exists on the site in the relationship between Main Street and the historic portico. Obviously, the natural veil that allows people to see through that and to see the new development beyond, and to think about this element on the site as that bookend public space that has a real variety of types of exterior spaces and natural environment or public spaces that you're familiar with, a more natural space that's similar to what's in front of the CPW building on Cedar Street, and also more structured space for large gathering that you're more familiar with when you think of Hutchinson Square. And I think the next slides just show, since we're focusing on the master plan and the density, this is the vertical density that's described by that plan. So again, the idea was that there was a stepping up, but of density that reached the maximum height allowable in the DMX district. But again, preserving that corner expression as the primary threshold to historic downtown. This is a good spot if you have any questions just about the recap of what we presented.
Yeah, thanks.
Is everyone familiar with that plan progression, kind of tracking the different iterations? I don't think we presented all of that last time.
You do.
When the Board of Architecture review was never involved in any of it. So, I mean,
So we
the county.
for the first time is what you presented.
That's not you guys, y'all did have a workshop of the planning commission in 2021, and y'all were invited to the focus group session, so that is not true.
You should have. In the minutes of that meeting, what I had to say at that meeting.
They had those comments that they will bring to bear in as we go through this.
Yeah, so we wanted to summarize what we heard from you in comments, and so this was that March 15th meeting that Jesse just referred to. And so this was, some of the comments we heard there, certainly emphasizing, the Preservation Society and your interest in the hospital and how important that was. And at that point, as George alluded to, this was the kind of a replica of the hospital, so if that was relocating where it was on the site and rebuilding it, and so it would have been a demolition, and so it was clear. You were asking questions at that point about approval we were seeking, and it was just for information only, and it was clear that there would be a development collective who would come back before you to ask permission at the time the demolition was to happen. We interestingly, at this meeting, didn't hear a lot of concern about the demolition that was in there, so what we really heard was a lot of concern about the density of the site. And that it seemed too built up for downtown Somerville, and that you couldn't kind of see through the site in terms of how your experience. As you walked around the site, that it felt like a big solid block as opposed to inviting and opening, and so those are some of the revisions that we have made since then. And so this takes us back to some of the things that we heard from you just recently in October in terms of summary, and obviously talking about the symmetry and central access and the importance of the center portico and potentially the two wings, and what would it feel like if you didn't have the two wings of the hospital, and the entire width of the hospital being important in terms of questions and ideas that you brought up about could you build behind it in terms of more new construction. So we have some diagrams to look at what the implications would be of that for your consideration and conversation tonight. And certainly with the preservation is your charge, and what would be the type of information you would need to know in terms of the rigorous review to ever allow demolition of the hospital or a portion of it. So that's something we certainly want to talk through tonight as well.
One thing about the placement of structures. The placement of a structure at the left-hand end by the street, as you look at the hospital, completely blocks the view of anybody leaving town, which I do 5 days a week, and became very aware of what my new sightline would be. And you would basically have to get directly in front of the hospital to see the portico. And so basically it becomes a portico for the cleaners and McDonald's. And so that was one of the other concerns I had.
This is kind of a diagram that talks about the guidelines for new development on the site, because we've got kind of bound by both your preservation guidelines, but also the zoning ordinances. And so this looks at the DMX district and the density. And if you were to leave the front of the site completely open, how much land that leaves developable, with the idea that if you kept the hospital and its original two wings. Left breathing room and code required separation between that and future buildings. You've got about 2.5 acres of developable land left on the site.
Yeah, and some of the other constraints, just to keep in mind, that we've known from the very beginning is that. With improvements along Highway 78, the new right of way actually gives us less vertical distance between the existing structure and the edge of the site. And so as one of the other things that we're trying to balance is, one of the things we've heard from the master plan study is that it's really important that to the town and the county, that the county has a presence on site. And so phasing is a critical component of how we approach the master plan, in that the county needs to stay in the existing building while the new office building that they will move into is being constructed, which means that we have to think about distances to actually build a new 3-story building that's 35,000 square feet to accommodate that. So these are just some of the constraints that we're trying to balance and work with.
What is the overall space acreage?
That's 5.175 acres. So this was just to indicate. The other thing that Heather did mention is that there's for the downtown mixed use district, there's a 2% open space requirement. So we have to at least provide 2%. This just gives you a sense of what 2% of our site looks like. So you have an idea of that scale, but also just to see that, the more the difficulty with the location of this in the center of the site, and the idea that the view corridors to that existing structure need to be preserved, is that a 5.175 acre site now has about 2.5 acres of buildable area for the type of density that we're hoping to achieve.
George, can you also discuss the other site constraints within that 2.5 acres, with setbacks, and the actual buildable area in that 2.5 acres?
We'll get to that if you don't mind, but absolutely, we have other diagrams that make up.
Oh, before you go, square footage of the hospital portion in red, how many square feet is that?
So I believe it's roughly 18,000 square feet.
Okay.
I can verify that. I'm not 100%.
But there's not
18,000. It's in that range. I think it's between 17 and 18,000 square feet, and that includes.
And the new county building is 30,000 square feet?
It's 38,000.
38,000, okay, thanks.
So this strategy, the preservation strategy, just kind of shows the process in earlier versions, compared to where we are today. In the improvements from a preservation standpoint, that have already been made in the master plan.
Yeah, so this was sort of the iteration that came during negotiations and is most closely aligned to the 2021 master plan that you had seen. In that the level of, you'll see it here in red, this is the footprint of the existing building on site. So this level of density that included the 5-story deck and the housing component, it had 70,000 square feet of office space, 2 retail buildings and a hotel. Only had a preservation strategy that aimed to reuse existing materials from the hospital, either as a part of the Welcome Park or in some other way. So our team absolutely heard and has a desire to want to preserve part of the existing building in place. So the current master plan that you saw most recently, the idea of that is that keeping that, what we really consider to be the heart of the existing building, that 2-story piece with existing portico, and really trying to retain that really important axial condition around the service square, and adding the 2 retail pieces that create a conversation, so that this existing building is now is a protagonist in a public space that these 2 other buildings also are a part of. So you can see that the level of density and the overall density of the project, the reduction and the removal of the structured parking, and also the preservation strategy is radically different than.
This may be a premature question, but when you present your plans to us, and I understand, I wasn't at the October meeting, which is May. But when you present this to the board, are you going to be presenting the architectural detail of all the buildings at the same time?
No, sir, because we would only be coming for approval for the county office building. And all of the rest of it is future phases, not yet designed. We have some conceptual imagery that was developed early on, but we would not be seeking approval, at least that's been the strategy to date, because that's only kind of conceptual mapping and master planning ultimately.
And we'll get to some of that tonight. We'll see some of the.
Yeah, you'll see some of the concept images, but it's still have a, you know, early versions that would need considerably reworked before presenting it to you.
Can you talk to me about why the parking deck was removed and you went for all on-site parking?
Yes.
Yeah, happy to address that. The parking structure could not be privately justified. The investment could not be privately made, but with the economics of the project. So market rents could not justify people in Somerville paying for parking, all in a private setting. So we would require public infrastructure or public funding, to be developed. And we ran several economic models. We looked at it very closely. But we also understood, and Jason, you're welcome to speak to this as well. The funds that are being the revenues that are being generated from the investment are wanting to impact far-reaching areas of the community and not just this site. And there was a time where I think it was a strategic decision to place investment in other projects, not just this project, to prop up what is a very expensive parking garage.
I think people need to understand that when realtors try and sell a house anywhere near Somerville, they drive them downtown to see the downtown of Somerville. So the fact that this may serve distant areas doesn't diminish the value of it fitting into the architectural palette of Somerville.
Jason, did you have any?
So exactly, I think also equally as important is when you have a development that's not nearly as dense. It doesn't necessitate the same number of parking spaces that a 5-story deck would require. Equally as important, we've tried to work to establish an opportunity to increase on-street parking, understanding the town's plans for Main Street. So we have been in contact with the South Carolina Department of Transportation very specifically about the right of way along Fords and Cedar being 100 feet and would allow for on-street parking. And we are willing to take on some maintenance responsibilities for 4th Street to increase parking along 4th Street as a result of that. Again, something similar that we've had to do in other locations.
That probably answer your question. But then one thing about this overlay that helps see, one of the criteria that George alluded to is that the county needs to stay in operations until the new building is built. And so you can see the limits of where you can build on the site new. And it does require removal of some of the wings to be able to have enough room to construct the new office building here. And that's part of the reason for the office building to be located along Highway 78 Fifth Street, so that the existing county building can stay in service during construction. They can move into the new building and then the rest of the site can be developed. So this kind of speaks to these, I'm going to just speak to the preservation strategy and the history of the hospital that George alluded to a little bit, and looking at the identity and what we heard from the community that people identify with is the columns and the portico in that central portion. And so that using that heart, the 2-story portion of it here at the center, you can kind of see this is the portion that we are proposing to preserve. And then in the lighter screened off in the leaves that were originally proposed to be removed. And again, how the views to that and reinforcing that center importance through the side retail buildings that would be built in a later phase. And then in these next series of images, Mr. Price kind of speaks to, again, some of the ideas for what the scale and character could be like. These were originally master plan images developed when we actually interviewed for the project with Berman, so these were all illustrative, and so the design was evolved from since then, obviously different signage, different character of Welcome Park, different architectural character and scale of the building. But the thing that's still important about these is the way that you can see through the site and into the portico of the hospital. George, you want to kind of
Yeah, so
speak through some of these two?
yes, and it's just trying to show that, you know, the whole point of a existing natural area that becomes a new welcome park on the corner is to preserve that veil that connects the visual and eye to the existing hospital building, and that really that what we call the heart of the existing building, it occupies the heart of the master plan. And so really preserving and restoring, I think a lot of that through site visibility that we heard you were concerned about with the higher density proposal with the 5-story parking deck. And then again, really emphasizing and what we think scaffolding the strong axial relationship of the existing hospital building, portico, the 2-story piece, and its symmetry, and the idea that the 2 smaller scale retail structures now help really strengthen that condition, that perspective to the existing from the edge of the site all the way into the development in a way that's much, in our view, much stronger than having this type of space like with service parking lots like is currently on site. And then again, this is not about architectural character, but just so you have a sense of not only how we're envisioning these open spaces, allowing for visibility to the existing historic structure, but also thinking about the way that the overall massing is respectful of it, since it is occupying the heart of the master plan. So you can see the 2 buildings that we're trying to place in an axial conversation with that existing structure are similarly scaled. Then the office building is a jump up in terms of scale gradient, and then the 4-story residential piece really being that highest density backdrop to the existing structure.
Again, we showed this just kind of to give you a feel for the master plan intent, but this is not something that's a foregone conclusion at this point, and the only thing that would be ultimately coming to you for approval in the future will be the hospital preservation strategy and the new building for the county.
In the park.
And the park that goes with it, and certainly the initial phase of site development in terms of the parking that allows access to that. Questions, comments? Keep walking through.
I feel like the hospital is so, it dwarfs it. What is such a grand image. I think people that live in Somerville and lived here their whole life is that this is a huge building in Somerville, and it's that development all around it just dwarfs it. It's like a little dollhouse stuck in the middle.
Is it just to clarify, is a piece of that the scale of the
I think
vertical density of
I think so. I think when you drive into Somerville, I'm just used to seeing green and green space coming in. And when I drive through that intersection, I feel like I'm home because it starts getting really green from there, entering from the interstate. And that just doesn't work for me.
I think we kind of hit these points already, in terms of the central portion of the hospital, and kind of studying, the challenges with the existing hospital, because it's a series of very small spaces, it's a wood frame building, the load bearing walls on the corridor, it's pretty tough building to adapt to current temporary uses as the county can speak to as they try to keep it going over time. This shows you the floor plan and the overlay of the original wings, and then dashed line is the center portion that we were proposing to preserve.
Hey, the presentation where you had that dash line portion as a well-finished architectural piece looks far better than trying to incorporate that into another building,
Standing alone.
or at least connections to other buildings being set well back rather than trying to keep the facade and then build new building on either side on the same plane as the existing wings.
And I guess we're open, we haven't solved for that piece of the master plan yet, how it connects with the future improvements. We will absolutely want to get that right and study that closely in coordination with your bar. So
That rendering you had where that it was standing alone also almost looks like a nice Virginia mansion.
Well, one of the things we also just understand about the structure when we get it back to the floor plan is that part of the reason we're thinking about if we're going to preserve a portion of the building, that this is the right place to do it, is that these are two-story existing brick load-bearing walls, even though that brick is expressed on the interior since it's been renovated so many times, and there are now openings that weren't originally to that wall, but that it will express as a brick facade, with the removal of the one-story wings. So that's one of the reasons why those images are showing some sort of expression of those two exterior walls that are new to the exterior but weren't originally. So we wouldn't have to come back in with brick to try to match, it's already.
This is the second floor of the hospital in terms of that, this is the center portion of the part that was added later to add a new stair. Again, it was the only part that was 2 stories originally. Just a little bit more, this is the typical section, if you were to slice through the wing.
So in that typical section, now, what, I can't see it from here, obviously, so can you describe what the construction of that, so like one-story wings? Please?
Yes, the 1-story wing, the exterior walls, which would be these walls here.
And those are
Luxury brick walls. And then you have,
are they low-bearing brick walls or are they wood walls, with frame walls?
we believe those to be low-bearing brick.
Yes, with the framing on the interior with structure.
But the brick is actually low-bearing.
Yes, as far as we have determined at this time. Yeah.
And so then you've got your center corridor and it's.
And what's the crawl space, is that a crawl space?
Yes,
And is that a concrete floor or is that a wood floor?
this is a wood floor.
Wood floor,
So
okay.
it'd be wood framing.
It's not wood.
Same as once you get into that attic level, there's wood framing on second floor, would be wood floor as well.
All right, and the ceiling, the roof of that one-story portion is. Sure, I'm sure it's not truss, no, the one-story portion.
The wood floor, yeah.
Yeah, so that's not trusses, so I'm assuming that's just stick frame wood.
It is,
And
we have some photos of in that attic space.
And so are some of the interior walls in load bearing as well. I'm assuming the corridor walls are,
Yeah.
but nothing else, it's just the corridor.
Here, forwards.
Okay, thank you.
this also gives you a sense of how low the ceilings are as well in the existing spaces.
Which is what are the ceiling heights?
They're not dimensioned on the plans, but they're roughly 9 feet, but it's,
Maybe 4 floors,
Yeah.
about 10 and a half, I think.
that's right.
We have looked at it several different ways, studying how to best, if we we're already planning on preserving one piece of it, but how do we reuse it efficiently and in a way that can justify the investment? It's been very difficult. I mean, I think also speaking with brokers and other businesses or representatives of business interest, it's not space that can be easily adapted for modern use. I think Jason can speak to that also with how the county is continue to invest in the space, trying to make it work for your needs. Of course, you can preserve old buildings. I'm not arguing that at all, but with the type of activation that this site is asking for, connection, Main Street, it would be hard to put the type of energy back into a space like that with some of its constraints.
And I think, I'll just add a few comments there to your comments. I think that's probably the crux of the problem. Is that the Somerville BAR is charged with historic preservation. And the town council at some point in time decided to put it in our district. I mean, so I say here today, I wish it wasn't in our district. It ought to be in the DRB. Because if the county wants, or if the city wants to redevelop it, like if this was Mr. Cage Piggly, for instance. He would just raise Mr. Cage Piggly Wiggly, and the DRB would look at the new architecture that would go in there, and they would pass through pretty quickly and pretty easily. If this was a Chrome G Myers, same thing would be true. But the council decided at some point to put it in the historic preservation district. And our charge as a board is to preserve history. And no matter how you slice this, it's a 95-year-old building that is historic. And I have a hard time going, I'm on the board to preserve history. How can I vote to tear down a 95-year-old building? And if the town no longer wants that to be preserved under our purview, then the town probably needs to move it to the proper board. And y'all shouldn't be coming to see us. And that's really the crux of the issue here. Because I don't see how as a board member for the BAR, I can promote demolishing the historic portion. The wings, not the wings, but the 1994 additions, absolutely. There's no issues there. It's the problem is the hospital core itself.
I appreciate that.
In the 30s.
Appreciate your comments.
And you're in a no-win situation. I completely get
So
it.
when we first came to the opportunity, we studied, we immersed ourselves in the community's planning documents. We understood this was in the historic district from the beginning. We also tried to read through the historic guidelines and the allowances for demolition when appropriate, because it happens. And so we didn't go into this blindly, but we also saw that if it is not in the best, is it economic interest of the community to preserve it, then it's a grounds, one of the criteria for demolition that would be acceptable. Or it's an economic hardship to the owner. Then those are grounds for demolition that would be acceptable. Do I understand that correctly?
Well, reading that correctly, it's hard to argue that the county is in an economic hardship position. And while I understand there was $1 million in revenue, you can't hardly say in one of the fastest growing counties in the state that it's not like it's Allendale County.
I mean, I think you can be well resourced and still have a piece of property that it's not efficient to maintain. Just because you have the funds doesn't mean you should be using them in that way. Now, for historic preservation, it's a good argument. So maybe we come back to that piece, but on the benefit for the community, what are your thoughts on that? I mean,
I don't think people I know that they feel that the monetary side of this outweighs the preservation side. And I also don't think, I think you would have a hard time selling most residents of Somerville that they were losing a cash cow by keeping this. I don't think claiming that the county would be not making as much money by not developing it would fly very well.
well, so I will say that in other terms, then for the sake of kind of framing the investment, it's not just, I mean, we're planning probably in excess of $50 to $60 million of private investment into this property. And then, yes, there's tax generation from that. That's one aspect, but there's also jobs, right? And part of the job creation and retention, I'll probably add. I'm not going to speak for the county, but I think the county, and Jason actually mentioned tonight, really wants to keep 100 well-paying county jobs in downtown, like to keep those jobs here, right? I can't speak for the county, and if this doesn't work out according to this plan, but it's much more desirable, in our opinion, to keep those jobs together with the private investment in the community here. Not to mention what was spoken earlier. We think that we can activate this site in a way that is beneficial for the community, significant benefit for the community, not just from the dollars and cents, but through another piece of framework for your cultural events, through the extension of Hutchinson Square, all the way down to this site. There are diagrams that we've seen already. We can, I think, maybe even have other ones that help establish not just 2% of open spaces being preserved on a 5-acre site, but a significant portion of open space. What is it, George? It's two acre or it's an acre plus 9% of the site. So I mean, it's, there are other benefits that when we read that in the beginning of our effort, when we read that such structure is a deterrent to a major improvement program that will be of substantial benefit to the town. It's all of those things from a developer's perspective, right? I hear you. You guys are the historic board, so you're looking through a very defined lens. Our job is, okay, we have to try to look at it from so many different angles, and that's one of the angles that we were convinced of. Hey, this is a great opportunity to go after, and so we have. I don't know what. We'd love to get your feedback on that criteria under the historic guidelines.
One of the aspects of our board is it has requirements for membership. So that it's not just a bunch of old ladies that live all day and 85 years old and we're forming the building and don't want anything to change. We've got engineers, architects. So it's a thoughtful board.
Yeah, contractor.
The other piece that I want to just add on that is that I have reread the exact words that are in that, and you're right, that is one of the reasons why we can do this. But we have worked on other sites that are in the downtown commercial core. And our application of criteria is pretty strict and like pushing hard to make sure that whatever we can preserve, and that whatever can be saved, and that's I think we've held to a really high standard, like all the other sites that we have considered and have granted approval to. And so while if I'm just saying this is not a historic site and looking at some of the things you're doing, I'm like, okay, I like the idea about creating the space. I have some preferences of iterations and ideas about that, which is not really importance right now. But the difficulty is that we have always pushed hard for people to save very modest little cottages, very modest little buildings that have had some degree of wear, tear. And so even though these are criteria, it feels like, I don't know, I guess I'm also struggling. Our charge is to preserve it, and maybe it feels like we're not preserving enough to really execute our obligation on the board. And I don't know where that balance is, but it feels like it's not quite there.
I think well, thank you for your comments, Ms. Burton. I remember your comments last time we met too. It's very thoughtful perspective for us. I actually am hearing you help make, help make apparent that there haven't been a lot of applications of a project like this.
This is by far the biggest.
And
all the other ones we've had have been like, you know, a small property, like a corner property where there's been new buildings added to historic ones that had historic cottages on it. And we've had a couple that are in that category. And we've really fought to make them keep
were they,
those.
I mean, when I'm hearing that example, to me, it doesn't sound like that has a substantial benefit to the town as a major improvement project or program. It has a significant historic benefit that you guys have been good stewards around.
I think I would beg to differ a little bit in that, you know, these are still commercial properties that were developed for commercial use, and they were gonna bring, you know, services, life. Like, it wasn't like this is just, you know, we're somebody's house and we're just fussing at them, like, you know, can you keep that little garage shed? Like, they're clearly not as big as this property, and they clearly won't have the impact, but they still have a big factor. And what I'm not sure about, or one piece that I'm wondering about, and I'd be willing to talk to other people on our board, is, are there ways that, like you, for example, you've kept a little center block as a piece, and there's some images that you've got, and like, especially when the road went in front and turned, it really felt like it had a lot of pedestrian space that people could have activities and create, you know, places that could be really, really positive pedestrian use. And maybe, I don't know, like, maybe there's a possibility of preserving the wings in some way. Maybe it's not the entire building and you're trying to literally use the building. And I don't know if this is enough of a preservation from our point of view, but can they be, in terms of massing, thought about more? Or, I don't know. But I guess that's where I'm struggling, is that I read that these are here, but we have pushed hard when we've asked other owners. And I guess it feels like it's maybe just a little.
I think one of the ideal ways to best use taxpayer money is to take over some of these defunct grocery stores and big stores that are like you've all done out on Wood Hill Road. And then those are generally freestanding. You can do anything you want inside, and they come with a ready-made parking lot.
But I do like this idea that we are creating a gateway, like a true gateway to Somerville, and that then there's this development between this corner and going down to Hutchins Square.
Make it a true bookend.
Yes,
Yeah.
like, I'm really excited about that. And like I said, there are pieces in the design that you have that if I'm just looking at it from an architectural planning point of view, it's like, okay, but I'm struggling with my role as on the BAR. to preserve.
Yeah, I echo Rachel's comments, I'm struggling too, concept of the bookends are great. Yeah, some of the design things, the plazas and stuff look really, really nice, and this, again, like I keep saying, if this was Mr. K's Piggly Wiggly. First of all, you wouldn't be seeing us, you'd be seeing another group of citizens, and, but it'd be super exciting. The only problem is we have a historic building smack dab in the middle of the piece of property, and so it leaves it extremely difficult for you guys to do something.
So how would you feel? And I'm just talking, I don't know the answers. How would you feel if, for example, there's the elevation maintained, maybe it's only the elevation and there's space behind it, and then other development, but that we have the that maybe that could be kind of interesting if it's a brick wall. That you have the, you know, the fragment of that and the shape is left.
And the facade of the wings.
Like, I'm just wondering, like, if that's a piece and that becomes part of how we're preserving, that this was the character of this was the thing that was on this site. And that maybe that's a way for you to think about, can that, so it's not just, like, I agree the portico is a piece, but as I said in our original meeting, half of the strength of it is that the wings and the two side wings and the entire building representing something important. And the portico by itself feels kind of cool in terms of the scale of everything else you've got. So I'm just wondering, is there a way that we can keep the fragments of our history, maybe not all literally, but maybe as
So
I don't know, I'm just wondering, like trying to figure out, is there a way that we can execute our,
There are examples of doing that in the National Trust. Department of Interior book on historic preservation of incorporating a portion of an older building into a new structure and how to make it define the new from the old, so you're not
They're distinct.
yeah.
We've had to do it on several of our projects.
but
And
but it has to be done keeping the same kinds of proportions.
I don't know exactly how you do it architecturally, but I think it could be a way to.
It would be hard for them to continue working.
Yeah,
Ms. French, can I ask, kind of try to envision what's in your mind's eye? You're almost putting the question, would it be more valuable to preserve the facade all the way across and potentially build behind it? Like, you think, anybody who's been to downtown Columbia, there's some high-rise buildings where you have, you know, this is the historic facade, and this is the high-rise building built behind it, so you have a facade.
Look at down by the, I still call it Omni, where that whole block has got very shallow stores with parking garage behind it.
Right.
And people from out of town don't recognize it. That's what it is.
Right, so as you're walking down the street, you see the storefronts of the historic buildings, and that helps maintain that scale.
Yeah, and then you just have to figure out an appropriate way to screen the new, I don't mean block it off, but I mean, to transition it into.
Right.
If I may jump in on that, so that was actually something that we have talked about, at least in relation to the portico itself. I think part of the challenge of what we're about building something of a larger scale behind it, that works very well in an urban setting when you're walking down the street and you don't have, you're not far enough away to really see what's behind there, but because of how far back that building is from the road when you're driving, my fear is that people will be big behind it it's really gonna enforce that structure. And so that was something that we kind of wanted to avoid, and we did like, at least again, at the portico section of. What if we did just keep the facade of that, but then the structural reinforcement to make that work, you're really honestly better off just keeping. The structure itself, so then I think it's a question of what you're saying of like leans being really important architecturally, not because they're. Super fascinating, but because they point to that portico and they give bricks to the porticos, and I think the conversation is like. If we kept the leans, what do we do with them? Part of the challenge is the one that you see on the far right, and this was something that George mentioned earlier. It makes building a new building on the site with a new office. Challenging, not to say that we can't solve that, but the existence of the entire building just makes further development of the site more difficult, and it just pushes more vertical buildings behind it, which again, I personally feel like we should try to avoid, because then I think that just completely dwarfs a hospital as it is,
One of the,
argue, but these are things that we've also considered, because it's interesting.
one of the nice things about that facade is there are 4 different planes, so it's not a.
But that's to it, yeah.
But there's interesting, it's on the overall picture, that you're building on the Fourth Street side, it looked like you're attempting to replicate the facade of the main building. And that kind of is I would think be out of place.
Are you talking about the architecture of the new building?
Yeah, it was a new building, the fourth.
Fourth side.
No, I think they were talking about one of the retail mass.
On Main.
Yeah, and again,
It's a main door.
Having to do buildings.
So,
yeah.
what, and that monstrously large building, it just, I mean. The facade of the original building is almost non-existent anymore.
We don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
And that was my thought, doing this really concerned about showing these were done in about a couple hours time. Wait, yeah, just, no worries, right here.
Jefferson's Lawn at BZA coming out from us.
So can,
I'll lie, speaking about it.
the 2 retail buildings regarding massing. There was a reason they're as high as they are in our program, like, I mean, it's in part of.
There were mezzanines in the retail restaurant.
That's right.
And the idea was that part of the way to really make these active lively spaces is to have exterior spaces that are actually a part of those zones. So you can see that they're elevated porches.
Outdoors engineers.
So they need gable roof,
No,
but, so I mean, so the maximum could come down.
Or if it's stuck down, or maybe there's a 1-story comparing that
I
high,
mean,
and back to it.
as I agree in relation to the portico, I mean, it does seem to.
Yeah,
We can look at that to create a better. Architectural reverence relationship and balance with the retail.
Now,
And sorry,
go ahead.
have you tried, like, there's pieces about this that I think could be, that are really positive, like it's got an awful lot of space that's along, the main street. And I really like the on access to the portico, there is something. But if you remove the supporting wings of the hospital building, so now it doesn't have sort of this like architectural increase in power, because it's only just by itself. I don't know if this is the answer either, but did you look at if those buildings at the front are more symmetrical, so that they're trying to sort of recreate the pattern.
supporting.
Yes.
Campus.
Yeah, that it's like they're the. But they're supporting the main thing as opposed to being interesting buildings of themselves. Their role is to make the portico piece the start.
Stronger.
And I feel the bill, when looking at this plan right. Has a more simple facade
Yeah,
and maybe speaks to some of what you're
I think
saying.
that's what and while I like having the porch parts facing the pedestrian, the fact that they weren't symmetrical, but they were on axis with the symmetry. Felt odd.
Is it true that Main Street and the site are a bit askew, like they're not necessarily,
The building isn't fully.
It's a little off, but not.
not
I would
necessarily.
say necessarily all things will notice it.
I would not see that.
But I do like that. I like that thought of bringing the scale down and kind of, and I think that's something that would be very doable or still.
One of the things that we liked about the Bon Air project, when they presented it to us, was the symmetry of the retail spaces going down to the cross part and
But those two end buildings facing the road, they weren't symmetrical, they were different.
no, I know that the symmetry of the two sides
Yeah.
and
So Heather, is there a path? I know the county's preference is a new building. And then their preference is to stay in the existing building, build a new building to program. But could there also be a path where if the existing hospital, the 1930s hospital is 18,000 square feet, and they've got 38,000 square feet, that they could occupy the 18,000 square feet and then build a 20,000 square foot new office building, which then would be smaller in scale and would fit more appropriately in the space that's left on that side of the site.
We still would have a parking issue. And we would have. A great reduction on the mixed use potential of the site, right? I mean, so if we preserve the facade, that 38 or that 18,000.
The 18,000, right?
Then we are going to be limited. On how many residential units we can program. And I will say we're already at we're at a lower end of residential scale to make sure we can. Do what's appropriate for the site.
Sure.
So to reduce that, it would, from a construction feasibility and this marketing perspective, it's hard to have a property management company for an apartment complex that's less than 150 units. We're already at 150, most are being built at 250. For those reasons, I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but if we will have less.
So here, the plan where the hospital is shown in red, I guess maybe, so it is.
And that's not even speaking for,
I'm listening.
for Jason.
I'm listening.
Yeah. We're just talking around all kind of things here. But
This one.
yeah, that was good enough. So if you had that preserved and then there was a smaller 20,000 square foot building on, not 4th Street, what is it? 78, thank you, 78. And then you had the two smaller buildings out front that were, maybe they are 1-story retail restaurant kind of space out front, creating kind of that quarter that you're talking about. That still leaves you, all of the backside of the site to create your residential space. And it feels like, and I haven't done a site plan obviously here, but it feels like there's enough room there to create 150 residential units right there, but maybe not. It feels like it is just looking at it from here.
Well, for sure, we'd have to go 5 stories instead of 4, which is what we were proposing. So part of the strategy was also to minimize vertical density on the site.
Right. As you talk about 5 stories it's still allowed by zoning.
It would still be within the next time.
That's
when you
But I
talk
got
about
that.
the square footage of the hospital, is that the hospital including the back wing?
No, that's the history, it was the 1930s portion.
And to consider with the proposed new office building on the north side along 78, even if you do reduce, I mean, right now we're proposing as 3 stories, reduce that to 2 stories, reduce the square footage, but in terms of the width, in terms of what is truly functional for an office building, it's kind of about as narrow as it functionally would be, and that would apply to it being 1 story, 2 story, 3 story, 10, because if you're going to have your corridor with your bathrooms and offices or suites on either side of windows, there's only so narrow you can get that where it works. So that has been part of the challenge, I would say, between the right of way and the open space and the wings. It's just trying to make that part usable. So you can't figure it out, but that's part of.
We've tried to figure it out.
Yeah.
We have not. So, I mean,
So what about you have that nice little white courtyard space? What if the, yes, so what if the county, built onto the backside of the existing hospital and their complex was still all maintained in the center, whether that's 2 stories or 1 story, I don't know, if maybe you see that.
Maybe even the fronts are just a facade and you build right behind it.
I think one of the challenges, this is just one, but one that we encountered early on when approaching the master plan was the county is not in a position to move multiple times. And if we try to adapt the current building, blow it out and build what we can within a shell for modern use, then the county has to move multiple times. They have to move out, they have to move back. And this, our task was, among other things, one of them was, okay, we need a good plan, good phasing plan that prioritizes the ability of the county to relocate one time to a future facility. And so
I understand why that's certainly preferable, but there are plenty of places where you have to do that good stuff.
There are, but I think we also need to be honest about what's available in Somerville. I think we need to be honest about what the citizens' charge was to us with respect to maintaining our presence. One of the things we identified early on in our strategic plan is there are not a lot of Class A office spaces, and there's very limited Class A office of any significant size that could house us. I've on purpose been very quiet because this is not my place. I'm here to listen. I've kind of shared what I know. I do like the idea, I'm familiar with the idea that you're talking about of the possibility of building something behind what I would describe as the existing 2-story section in the wings. It wasn't just simply a matter of inconvenience. Again, this is not your charge. Your charge is to preserve a building. My charge is to find opportunities to find efficient use of space. We're already relocating folks from where DSS was, means nothing to you, 216 Orangeburg Road, because we recognize we have a charge to provide animal control services. And so we're moving those people out of a downtown area, which that's not the highest and best use of downtown space, is animal control and mosquito control. We need to provide that service. Nobody wants to be overwhelmed by mosquitoes. And we definitely recognize the need to protect animals. So we're looking at those opportunities from a standpoint of even getting to a building that's 35,000 square feet versus something that's 40,000 square feet or 70,000, all of those things. The other thing though, I want to mention, I think the way that we view that block is going to change significantly. I think Main Street is going to be different if the town is able to execute their plan, make it more walkable. It's not the most, it's not the safest street, let's just say that. It's definitely not the safest street currently, really probably begs to be 2 lanes with on-street parking. And I think that's going to look very different. But I will say on the opposite side of that, I think when you have a major thoroughfare, which is West 5th North Street, which is not going to just be in this block, but continuing all the way down to Berlin Myers and back out to Jedburgh. I think you want something like that park on the corner, but I also think you want something like a building of some scale, whether it's 2 stories or 3 stories. If you bring it down to 2 stories and make it longer, something has to be done to really provide a buffer, I really believe, and also a bookend. And we've talked about that a lot, but sitting here and thinking about the scale of this building versus something that would be similar on that particular side of 78 near Main, but not on the corner and disrupting what would be the park, I think makes a lot of sense. Relative to, cost of moving twice and all those things. I mean, if that's ultimately what the decision is for this particular piece of property, that might change a number of things because the county has also contemplated relocating all of these operations out to in front of law enforcement complex. And we secured property to do that several years ago. So this was really an attempt to reactivate what we consider to be one of the most important locations in the downtown Somerville area. And one of the reasons why we were trying to maintain a presence was to try to make this a successful project, because it is difficult at this point, based upon some things that have happened on the other side of the interstate, to activate office. We don't plan to be here forever. And then it could be something that someone else could occupy in the future.
Speaking of scale and just in the spirit of kind of getting all the constraints on the table, Mr. Kennedy, just some of your comments about density and like to answer the question that you asked earlier about what are the other requirements in terms of street frontages and minimal setbacks, and if you were to build new on this site today, what you would be required, what we or anybody will be required to do to develop the site, given the zoning ordinances that are in place in the town. In terms of, again, the scale that's envisioned for the future of Somerville based on the current master plan and ordinances. So George, if you want to kind of walk through, just these again, just quickly in terms of familiarizing everyone.
So this is just equal diagrams that are in your UDO that describe sort of like the development character that's underpins those guiding principles for the DMX district that we are in. So the idea obviously is that parking is in the center of the site and does not have a visual expression to public ways or pedestrian areas. The buildings generally have a zero setback condition so that they are actually defining the pedestrian condition and also the edge condition of the site. Go to the next one. And so some of the components that we layered into this diagram that you've already seen here, it also includes the idea that frontage is one of the components that's included in the DMX standard. So that's the length requirement that the buildings have to be fronting each public way. And for the DMX, just to give you a visual of what that looks like, minimum frontage is about 35%. Is that correct? And this more or less is the length of 35% of the work frontages on our site. So our strategy was to, design density on the site. Here's the next one that sort of speaks to most of those conditions. That we also learned that open space is included in frontage requirements as well. So technically, what we're showing here, we would almost have 100% frontage on Main Street. And close to that on both of these two edges, but the idea is that the buildings being protective and defining the urban environment and parking in the center is really in alignment with the design principles for the DMX. But also, all of the structures have a maximum height requirement of 55 feet, and we presented some useful comparisons. So maybe
Get into this.
yeah. So what we did, and again, we're not really wanting to have too much conversation about the architectural character that we're showing, but this is the office building that you saw in elevation when we presented to you last month. And so right now you can see that the top of our parapet, which is this top line, is roughly 50 feet. And what we try to do is find buildings that are either visible from our site or also located within the historic district or in the district between our site and Hutchinson Square that provide useful comparisons in terms of scale. So you can see our building height and scale compared to the First National Bank of South Carolina, which is on Main Street and visible from our site, and roughly within 4 feet in terms of the height. And also did some comparisons with this building, so the Somerville Town Hall Annex, which you can see at the lowest roof line is 4 feet lower than our building, but exceeds it when you include the architectural corner elements. And just showing the CBW building, the idea that sort of the strategy of us thinking about creating sort of like a base that differentiates from the third level was to sort of reinforce the type of scale that you are more comfortable with for some of the CBW building on Cedar Street. And I think we have just one final one that speaks to the height of the parking deck that's also adjacent to this in your historic district. It actually exceeds the height of the office building that we're proposing. So that just gives you a sense of, how the vertical density that we're talking about, particularly with phase one, has a relationship with some of the other structures that you're familiar with and contribute to the character. That's all.
Last piece of the pie was really related to parking count. Again, there's so much around where's the parking, how much do you need, and so not to support the development.
Yeah. We heard some feedback from you initially that with a much higher density design that had the structured parking, that there didn't seem to be enough public parking that had provided access to the public parks that we were saying were an important part of the life of Somerville. So we heard that feedback from you, and that's part of why the parking configurations actually have a more direct relationship to those spaces now. And we heard feedback that spoke to just the overall count. So I think, again, I mentioned sort of the DMX design principles for this district. So for our site, we're only allowed to put surface parking in zone 3, which is basically the center of the site. And we just wanted to show a comparative slide that shows, the existing condition on the site is the exact inverse of what's the spirit of the DMX zoning, where parking is actually on the frontage of the site surrounding the structure in the center. And that when our development strategy eliminated the structured parking component, we wanted to make sure that where we're thinking about doing surface parking was in line with DMX values.
How many parking slots were you
I believe
allowing for residential unit?
Not enough.
Right.
One per, and then, it's all based on a shared use matrix where county's gonna be there, and retailers will be there more intensely during daytime hours, residents will be there mostly in evening and weekends. But at night, I don't know, is it 1 for 1 that we were programming or should we post
Mostly
it?
170 spaces
Yeah,
total.
yeah.
And really it was to maximize the parking on the site while also maximizing open space, the density that we were trying to achieve. So,
And the 170 includes all the street parking?
No, it's not.
They're not,
They did not.
no, it's on site.
again, that's
There's
just,
the 170 count. And this is
That part-
additional for the street.
Is that driveways in all off 4th Street? Like, is there a drive off Cedar?
so in the current master plan, we would be eliminating the in and outs on Cedar Street. And we would only have in and outs off of 4th Street.
And the one here would go underneath the building, that's
Correct.
the idea. The future residential building.
One of the things that we had heard was the importance of, the greenway that's envisioned that is now most present in front of the CPW building, being something that we would want to experientially extend as a pedestrian way on our site. So one of the initial master plan values was to eliminate vehicular traffic coming into the site off of Cedars, but that felt like a more pedestrian space.
Or was that parking then? You had street parking on Cedar? Angle parking?
That's right in here.
And there are just the other thing that just to mention is that there also are improvements happening on this edge of Cedar Street as well, the addition of right turn lane that we had to also design.
That was in the final analysis, which is related to open space and park and percentages of open space, you can probably get pretty quickly. Again, some of the comments we heard from you all from the community.
So again, just as context, this is the amount of space required by the zoning requirements. And in moving from the 2022 to the current, we greatly increased the amount of open space that we're proposing for the development. And just contextually with our conceptual plan overlay, again, it's about 0.10 acres is what we're supposed to provide on the site relative to. And in the end, we're providing about 8% open space, and that's roughly 0.9 acres, I'm sorry. And we wanted just to show that relative to a public space that you're familiar with in terms of its scale. And you can see the Hutchinson Square is about 0.8 acres in terms of its scale. And again, the ambition, we've heard some feedback about what is really the ambition in terms of the design of Welcome Park and the public spaces on the site, and really it's about creating a variety of spaces that feel familiar to Somerville. Again, with Welcome Park really being a more natural area where all of the healthy pine trees are preserved, so it's less of a formal structured space, the more natural space that is that natural veil. Most familiar to you with the type of space that is currently a part of that existing viewpoint in front of the CPW building, also what you might encounter in a Sylvia Park. Whereas there are other aspects of what we're thinking about, particularly related to Welcome Park, that have more of a structured axial condition that connects the proposed office building to Main Street, but also create visibility and larger gathering spaces in some sort of relationship to what we were proposing as the relocated Veterans Memorial.
I think that opens to continue the conversation and next steps and thoughts and strategies. And we didn't even pull out, this may be helpful for kind of any exploration as we're got about 20 minutes or so. There's been the site plan.
Before we get into that, I don't think we can, I wanted to kind of just pause for a moment and just evaluate where we are, because I think we've come through, well, any questions for what they just presented? Thank you, George and Heather. I think that green space thing is especially helpful. I had not seen a lot of that before, just the last few days. We're so interested in moving forward and doing this right for Somerville. We know, and I think we've heard several different paths that are possible to achieve our objectives and to do something consistent with what Somerville does well in celebrating historic places and extending their downtown experience to the site. We'd love to come to a design agreement if we can find a way where there is preservation of the portico that we want to continue to have as the heart of the plan. Look at ways we can maybe entertain expanding that. I think it's going to be very hard on the wing that's closest to the office building, as we've discussed. Because we want parking. I think we can certainly study the other wing and solve for that more easily. And then make sure we get our framework right, our scale and massing correct in a way that the portico continues to be a significant aspect of this property and the community. We also talked about
Tim, you mentioned this doesn't feel like it should be in the historic district, but it is. And so you all are doing your job, which we respect greatly. And we're doing the same. I don't know what that process looks like. It feels like the first option is more ideal for, consensus and community consensus building. But maybe, I want to kind of pull your feedback on some of that again. And then the third possible path is an acceptable demolition plan, which I guess goes with the first one as well. Is there a way to relieve your responsibility appropriately based on the accepted demolition criteria? That's already been created. And Frank, I don't know what that process is. Is that a bar decision to acknowledge this is an acceptable demolition because one of these criteria or multiple criteria are met? So you come to, as educating myself here. So you guys would make that decision. So again, I think the first one is our ideal. I think we can work towards it. But I really want to, kind of circle back to that. Well, we still have a few minutes together to hear, so we can define our next steps. We can define how we've already prepared to come back to you.
I'm not sure what you're really asking. Like, I feel like we've all shared our thoughts. I don't know that I have any wrap up pieces. I mean, I think it's been a productive exercise and that it was good to do this. But I'm imagining that you would, confer and evaluate and test and try and see.
I guess if I was sitting in his shoes, I wouldn't be sure what I'm supposed to test and try. Because I heard so many different things. And so I think he's trying to look for some consensus as to what should they test and try. Is that?
That's fair.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, thank you.
So how would you answer that?
Well, I don't know. I was looking, I would answer.
I would be very reluctant to vote for demolition until I saw a pretty finished product of what is planned.
Yeah, and I guess David,
Where the spaces are, what the architecture is going to be like.
well, and I think what, from my perspective, and for everybody's knowledge, I mean, my seat on the board is unique because I'm the representative for the Historic Preservation District. So I'm appointed by those guys. So I have a extra special duty, different than my other board members, that I am supposed to represent and vote as they would want me to vote. So just so everybody would understand that. And they will be opposed to any demolition, by the way. But trying to find a path forward, I think the way I would prefer from my own perspective would be to see some studies trying to show that you try to save it. Because to be quite honest, right now, I heard you say things, but we haven't physically seen examples of, well, what would this look like if we saved this 18,000 square feet? And so this is what we could get. This is what it would be. We would get 120 units. We would get 150 if it was 5 stories. We would get 20,000 square feet over here, but not 38,000 square feet. I'd like to see several examples of what it could be. And then that may help us evaluate, well, is that okay? Is that good enough? Or is that not good enough? And that maybe now it does want to. Is that helpful? I don't know.
I think that is helpful. I think we are charged under the Secretary of the Interior and also with the Board of Architectural Review. That, I mean, if you read the guidelines, I think it cannot be demolished building.
And I think we speak in one voice is that we're talking about the 1930s report.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to make sure that.
The historic part of it.
Go ahead. Yeah, I have a question that may be totally different. But you said something that's very important, and I think that it's almost a conflict between this being in the historic district and the DMX zoning, but that's not, I'm seeing that, but don't dwell on that. But that's, in listening, almost seems to be a conflict, but what I think is equally as important is to think about what you currently have. And Mr. Price talked about McDonald's and the dry cleaners and what used to be a filling station across the street. And we talk about the corner that does still have trees. One of the questions that I really have is kind of twofold. First, how do you come up with a strategy working with what the future streetscape will be to make it greener all the way down to Hutchinson Square? It's different when you're walking than when you're driving past it. And I would really say, I think it would be important for us to think about that, not just with, okay, if we improve 500 North Main Street, it becomes a greener site. If Main Street is reduced in terms of no longer being 5 lanes, and I'm putting that in quotes because it's technically 5 lanes, but be careful. And you really start to think about some of the things that George talked about. Right now, we've got a gravel lot that needs to go away. I think we all can agree that that gravel lot needs to go away. Right now, we've got these 2 areas that are kind of flanking the promenade up to the building, and there's parking there. There's nothing particularly beautiful about that. And so I think as we think about how this site can be redeveloped, sorry, Robert, I'm not thinking about this in terms of money. I'm really thinking about this in terms of the beauty of that particular location. Also thinking about, we hadn't really talked about what was there before. We hadn't talked about the presence of all the history on that block and adjacent blocks dealing with medical facilities, the other hospital, the Colored Hospital. We had talked about the presence of the Native Americans that were on that site. We hadn't talked about springs and any of those elements that I think are also things that need to be preserved, not necessarily in the building, but remembered on that site. We talked about Missouri, which I think is very important because of their significance in terms of Dr. Missouri in the hospital. But I think there's so many other things that need to be considered that are remarkable that don't need to get lost in this, because if you're not careful, you can preserve the building, you can preserve the main section, the wings, but are you still preserving the history? And I only mention that because when I heard someone say that the Welcome Park just seemed to be what I'll call highly developed, I think when the Welcome Park is there and you remove the parking elements that are currently existing that front Main Street, you're going to have a lot less imperviousness. You're going to have a lot more green. You're going to have an area where your Veterans Memorial, when it's not sitting up against Main Street, you can actually go to that memorial and really contemplate, feel safer, to be very frank. I've been there. I've been there many times. I walk that site all the time. So I think all of those things are important when you all consider the development of the site beyond just the building itself, as important as that is with your charge. But again, I'm not trying to speak against the county or even against the town, but the placement of this in DMX almost seems to be counter to it being historic.
Completely agree. 100%.
As far as next steps, you're looking at design options, obviously the demolition of any portion of it, of the non-original portion, obviously is gonna be a bit controversial. We discussed some options of some carpet removal, like if you cut the facades or maybe some of the wings. Maybe some of that gets opened up and becomes outdoor space but not occupiable space. Are those types of strategies things that you would be willing to consider as potential options? Or do you really feel like those wings have to be preserved in order for this project to be viable? Because I think we're happy to explore, even a lot of the narrations look how creatively could we just need a massing, create option for the portico, but if it's a hard line when there that we really need to stay, then it would be helpful for us to know that going into it so that we're studying more what's around the building versus what the building is. So I think part of this is kind of finding out what your limits are. So that when we do come back to you, whatever options we're showing you is not something that's gonna be a hard no based on what you're seeing.
I don't know that we can fully answer that now.
I mean, I think that you need to see it, it's just, I think if there's a,
Yeah.
if it's in mind towards.
Cause I think that Tim's mandate is probably stricter than
yours.
mine would be.
Yeah.
And a really beautifully designed piece that had was not literal and that entire building had to be maintained as it is. I'd be very open to looking at it and seeing how you're presenting that and executing that and how is that used on site. So if it's really well done and it you know, it meets several criteria. I mean, it's not just the people who are on the site, but it's the people driving by, it's the people walking on the site, it's the people who might be going there and having dinner, it's the people who work there. And it's all the people who might be going to contemplate or pay their respects at the memorial. And so I think there's a lot of people who might come to this site, but I think those are definitely ideas that you could consider and explore. And that we'll just have to see how far you can go and how well you can do it but I think we're open to hearing about it.
And Mr. Price, when you think about that, would you like to see? So when we came to you before, it was really just about the county office building, the first phases. Are you asking to see the entirety of the site in feeling like in order to approve demolition, you would need to understand the entirety of the build out?
I personally would. Yeah, I mean, it really to approve a first part of a master plan without seeing the entire master plan in its entirety, what's going to happen. You might as well not do any of it. The other large tracks that we have done in here, the architect has given us the complete master plan, how they were going, and it proceeded that way to its completion. Over several years. Yeah, and to have it just in your mind that maybe we're gonna do that, but maybe we won't. I mean, what's the thing that really got me on your plan was the fact that you're saying the most important part of that entire site is the facade of the existing building. And yet everything you've done is to not to take away from it. First, that I mentioned before, that building that's on the 4th Street main side. I mean, that is such a massive building that it will have integrated some of the features of the facade of the main building into it, but that takes away from the
You know, the way
We're trying to save.
I feel like it feels even more like that because that's all we saw.
Yeah.
So it really felt too big. And, you know, until you can see it in its whole context, it might feel very different. And if it was part of a something, instead of just, there's one building, here's the little photo.
Well, I know that the architects nowadays, they want to do things in this modernistic style. Maybe that one, we need to go back and not just look at the facade, but look at the building. And somewhat try to incorporate the design of that building into the new buildings. I mean, the appearance of them. And I mean, the easiest thing is say, it's all brick, make things brick. I don't necessarily mean just that, but kind of make the new structures look like they've been there a while, not that it's something that,
Or would,
somebody has just now come up with the idea of doing it this way.
I'm sure the Department of Interior and the National Trust could provide numerous pictures of projects that have had the same kind of issues that we have here, where we have a old building that has some history to it, that's on a piece of property in a town, and the community needs more resources added to that building. And I bet we could find some that we might find palatable too.
but I just want to follow up with your thought, Phil. What I have always understood by the Department of the Interior and what they're suggesting is that if you're going to do new, that there's a really clear separation between this is the historic piece, here's the new piece, and that you're not trying to just like spit out more, but that you're really highlighting and honoring what was there previously by having it be a distinct separation, which is not what I thought I heard you say. So I'm just asking for clarification on that.
It's a modernistic, and I use that, you know, off the top of my head, but a more traditional buildings rather than something that's out of line with everything else in some of them. I mean, we've got a variety of structures, a variety of type of structures in this town. But
So they reference the building on Cedar. Do you think that it's an appropriate inspiration?
which one you talking about? Yeah, that was a fantastic decoration. We were
Involved in that, but I'm just asking, like, is that something that you think would be?
I mean, that's the idea of a traditional building rather than.
But when you look at that building, it's got pretty weird. It's very detailed.
Yeah.
We would like to get to that point where we can solve for the most appropriate design of the buildings. And so we're eager to get that feedback, but we haven't even given you something to react to. So I think we can get to that point, even if I gotta be careful about this, I might have to walk back, but if you say, you know, Mr. Price, that you can't approve demolition until you have an acceptable architectural design detail, is that what you were saying earlier?
I would like to see what the master plan is. And also the architectural detail is going to be carried out throughout the.
So I feel so confident in our team of experts and your expertise as a committee to know if we have a set master plan that we can agree to, we're going to get to design.
we'll arrive there. It's just a matter of time.
For example, like the original master plan we saw had two little buildings that were sitting in front of the portico. Different shapes, different looks. Like if you draw that and it looks like that, are you now going to give us a building that fits those footprints? Or is everything like how,
I guess that's what we probably need to define together.
yeah, so that, I think that's our piece of just saying like if nothing is that we can say is like, okay, we all have agreed and that we at least know where future buildings might be, what kind of massing or shade they might be. With like all of those pieces, like, yes, you can design down to more detail than that, but if, I think we have to know that if we're agreeing to demolish this building and that we're doing it for whatever the specific reasons are that we have decided warranted, that it's in the context of, yes, it achieves the goals that we're trying to achieve. And if nothing can be taken as, I guess I'm just saying, if I just had little boxes on a plan and I don't even know if those boxes on the plan are actually gonna be where the buildings are, the shape or the height, like, I can't say, go at it, like, sure.
Right, it's
Normally called high scale of mass. So while all the design details may not be finalized, it's in general,
we need to find the body where and then which those protocols will take place. Charleston BAR, where your first submission would be high scale mass, you know.
You look at our approval, which was very rapid upon there.
Mhm.
It doesn't look like anything in some else. It's got a bunch of the several buildings on it. All have some kind of detail that is consistent with proportions in Somerville, like. More verticality in the windows than something. And then bricking detail, not necessarily historic bricking detail, but not flat fronts. And, you know, you want but you can't, there's nothing there to see yet, but that's the kind of thing that's struck us. We were very uniformly impressed with that as a board for only 2 or 3 meetings. And so I think there are plenty of designs that can integrate themselves with the building that's there. It's figuring out how to do it, and it doesn't have to be brick.
I think what I'm hearing too, from the perspective of is demolition okay, it's almost like a conditional approval in your mind of like, yes, the partial demolition, keeping the portico is okay on the conditions that there is a 1-story retail in this location and there's a park and pier, and you're just kind of agreeing to the terms of the master plan. Is that fair to say?
No, we've been burned.
No.
We just either get the mechanism or, yeah, master plan approval that has detailed.
Yeah, I mean, we've done that, not with the BAR before, but we have done that with the DOT, where they basically approved a master conceptual plan and master like design guidelines to talk about the detailing or that type of stuff. Where it's not necessarily you're showing what the actual facade looks like, but you have design guidelines that they're basically approving that will guide the rest of the development. So that is something we've done with the DRB, for we have not done the BAL before, but as you all admitted, we don't have this many projects of this size and nature with the BAR to really have proceed doing that prior. So that is something that could be pursued. Do you want to recognize in light of respecting everybody's time? It sounds like, I think, just based on the feedback I've heard, it may be best to have another workshop to allow them to present what they've had a chance to look at and provide as examples of what y'all have asked them to research and examine. It sounds like that would probably be the best format, rather than coming back to an actual DNR meeting, if they have another workshop, maybe, I'm not sure how long it might take you all to quickly examine and review what's been discussed, but we can certainly work with them to find the time if that works, to give them enough time, and that also works with y'all's schedule to schedule another workshop before it moves back to an actual BAR meeting, if that sounds like what y'all also believe would be the best next course. I just want to respect everybody's time tonight and hope someone will stay here any later than they have to. We did kind of say about 2 hours, so.
You got a lot done.
Yeah, this was great. I think, it was very helpful for now.
Absolutely.
But it, because y'all agree that another workshop would probably like.
That's probably, but yeah, it's funny, what we've seen today, having been with an architectural engineering firm for many years, I know that there's a lot of money that goes into putting drawings down, and then when having to do this throwing in the trash can. So it would be good for us to be able to look at you at almost less than a 35% design review, so we can see where you're going and say, no, don't do that. I think that would be important, and it would do overall for us here on that corner, because that was an important corner. I look at the other side of the street with all the little bitty things there, and think about the fact that corner could have been that way too. It's just.
It's gonna be a nice new bank there. It's gonna be a nice new bank there.
But it's just. That would be, I mean, it's just. My thought is, if we can. In your planning part, that we can still. Say. Thumbs up or thumbs down, on specifics, and what I mentioned this at our BAR meeting out. I wish that y'all had been involved enough in that you could have sat in some of our earlier BAR meetings and seen exactly what went on and what was discussed and how it was discussed. And I think there probably was some videos of some of the meetings, at least, that since we've been having it up here, that might be worthwhile for y'all to do a little bit of studying of that what we've done in the past, and what the questions. That's the big thing, the questions that we ask, because we've had to give way at certain times to a little bit of some stuff, but how we've progressed on some of the big projects, and one is right back here behind us. That one took a lot. And I know there are earlier ones that were major things, several churches that we had to get into master plans for where they had 3 or 4 buildings planned and how they were laid out and where they were, and the whole agreement of them. I think that would be good. I'll make myself available for that time.
Yeah, I'd like to be real proud of whatever we end up with. Not have to be apologetic about it.
Are we ever apologizing? Are we ever apologizing?
I'm surprised. Very serious.
Thank
you all.
Okay, thanks.
You all got to set the time. For good reason. So I mean, we work with, I mean, and all, and come up with the, how far now we can be doing it. And
Yeah, I can't.
know that.
How much time you bring down there? We appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
It's a little church about really. Presentation.